So before we get into reporting the project performance, I think first we need to look at the quality of the baseline and how important it is in terms of evaluating the true performance of your project. So let's look at the scenario first. So the scenario is if a project manager deliberately pads the baseline by 50% estimate and then he boasts that he delivered this project in 30% less time, then does it mean that this is a peak performance or poor planning? So as you can see that when you try to deliberately add some estimates to your baseline without any rationale and you report it to the management and to the customers that you are completed ahead of time, I don't think it's talks about the true performance of the team and the project manager. It boils down to you are doing a poor planning. So in these cases, naturally, you have to save time and cost to your company, rather you are trying to spend more time and more cost with respect to the company you are working with. So naturally, the executives needs to be involved both in the planning and baselining of your project. So it is their job to ensure that the plan what has been baselined is realistic but also challenging. So which means that we ideally should not add buffer as a part of your project. So that's where we are trying to come down to. So the next question is, do project managers need time buffer? The answer is obviously yes. The reason is every project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product. So every project is having some amount of uncertainty, and for those unforeseen events, you need to have some time buffer. So the next question is, should I make the time buffer visible or not in my schedule? The answer depends on what type of contract you have with your customer. So there are two often used contracts called, one is a fixed price contract and another is called as a time and material contract. So in a fixed price contract, naturally the cost is fixed by the customer and the customer will not be overseeing how much effort you have spent. The reason is the cost is already finalized. Whereas in a time and material basis, the cost is more going to be based on the amount of effort you are going to spend on the job. So naturally, the customer will be behind your back inspecting what work you are doing every day and every moment. So if you are in a fixed bid contract, naturally you need some kind of time buffer going by the same rationale of why project is temporary. But generally in a fixed bid contract, you are even expected to hide the buffer from the client. The reason is it might be a policy or the client need not know about how much of buffer you have added as a part of the project. Okay, but you should not hide this buffer to your executives. So that is something which you need to remember when it comes to a fixed bid contract. The next is the time and material contract, where you need to make the time buffer visible to the customer. Some of you might have doubts here, but in my project we are not making it visible. Remember, the only reason why you are making it visible is so that there is a trust relationship created between the customer and the project team. And that too, you are very transparent in telling them that there are certain unforeseen events that might happen in a project. And only if those events happen, we are going to take that buffer from this project. So now we have understood that how important a baselining is and how buffer should be ideally added. So there are certain methods of hiding time buffer if you are working on a fixed bid project. So the order in which I have listed down the options is in such a way that as you go down this list, the chances of identifying a buffer by the customer will ideally increase. So the first option is you can be taking the most pessimistic estimate in terms of your deadlines or your material delivery dates or some key milestones. So when you are taking the pessimistic dates, naturally it is assumed that these activities will be delayed as late as possible. The second option is you can add some soft dependencies between your activities. So there are certain discretionary dependencies you might have between tasks. So in those cases, rather than making it more aggressive dependencies, you can go for a more soft dependency. The third option is you can pad duration, you can have some extra work estimates. Naturally, you can keep the work hours of your resource low. So generally when we talk about schedule, we say a resource works or your team member works 8 hours per day. But truly speaking, no team member works 8 hours per day. That's reality. So you might want to take the realistic number. Let's say that on an average he works only 6 to 7 hours. So naturally go to the calendar of the resource and change the working time from 8 to 6 or 7. And try to ignore the learning curve of certain activities. Certain activities in your project plan might be repeatable. But generally, when you have a repeatable activity, the estimate should come down when you do the same activity again and again. So due to unforeseen events, you can just assume that all these activities are totally unique activities so that the buffer is still there as a part of your schedule. The last one, you can add some additional all days as a part of your calendars also. Now let's move on to today's topic. Okay, so today's topic is going to be on how do we communicate the project performance to stakeholders. So the order in which we are going to look at the components is, first we look at views, followed by the tabular reports, visual reports, how to make use of the copy picture and the timeline view, and finally we will look at exporting the project data into spreadsheets or some PDF formats. Now let's talk about views. I hope all of us do know views are ideally an integral and a major component in terms of working in Microsoft projects. So let me go back to my schedule. This schedule is already prepared and it is also baseline. Okay. So what I mean by views is, if you go to the view tab, you can see that there are two groups called task views and another group called resource views. The task views ideally consolidates all views related to tasks, and the resource views has all views related to resources. So through these views, you will be able to understand the schedule performance in different formats. For example, if I change my view from Gantt chart to, let's say, tracking Gantt, you will be able to see the critical path automatically highlighted in red color, and you will also be able to know the percentage complete with respect to your activities. So each view has been created for a specific purpose. Now, these views, if you look at it, will have some sub-components within it. The first one is called as a table. So currently the table you are looking at is called as the entry table. Okay. So the table is all about the group of columns that are visible within this current view. So the current table you are looking at is the entry table. So in order to change the table to something else, on the same view tab, you can access the other tables by making use of the tables button. For example, if I change the tables to cost, you will be able to see cost related information of these activities. Now let me go back to the entry table. So the first one which we need to discuss is, what are the views or the tables that might be useful for us